Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 254 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on how are behavioural experiments used in cognitive behavioural therapy. And it is the 24th of February 2024 as I record this. So originally I didn't want to do a therapy-based podcast episode because I know we've been doing that quite a lot lately on the podcast. So instead I wanted to do some social psychology related or something that was clinical psychology but just not therapy-based. However, my week's been quite weird. It's been really funny, and I've actually got a lot of really useful stuff to share in the personal update, which if you're a psychology student, definitely listen to that. And even if you're a psychology professional or anyone else of the wonderful listeners, definitely check it out. But because of my particularly odd week, I just haven't had time to do another blog post. So, because this month's new release was CBT for depression, well, an introduction. Well, I actually want to share this a brand new release, which I actually love this book. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and this is what I actually found my passion for CBT because this book is just absolutely fascinating. But more on that later on. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about behavioural experiments, which if you guys have spoken to me personally, which I know like some of you have, if you've listened to the podcast before, and if I've ever had the chance to talk about behavioural experiments, then you know I absolutely love these. I think they're really powerful. They're such an interesting intervention, and they're just absolutely brilliant. And I'm really passionate about them because I just think they're wow. I just think they're really impressive. So, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about what they are, how they're used, and you're going to be introduced to this brilliant topic. So, moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And the first one is, how will you be remembered? It's no secret that the world has a wealth distribution problem. The UK is no exception. In fact, according to the Equality Trust, it's one of the top offenders amongst other developed nations, with the UK's 50 richest families holding more than the combined wealth of half of the UK population in 2023. Researchers suggest that wealthy people are much more likely to leave their fortunes to family members rather than good causes, making a case for the charitable giving that the super wealthy find convincing, then it could have a significant impact on the redistribution of the wealth. Writing in social, psychological, and personality science, Jessica Park and her colleagues at Duke University explore what they call the Andrew Cullum effect, named after the famed US philanthropist. And I realise I probably said that last name wrong, so apologies. Over 4 studies, they found that in encouraging people to consider how their lives and legacies could impact future generations, can have a significant impact on how they choose to distribute their wealth, representing a potential powerful lever in promoting philanthropy. So I think there's a lot of different perspectives we can take on this, including some socio-political ones, which I will not get into. But I do think that when it comes to wealth, it's always quite interesting. And I think that the super wealthy definitely should do some charitable giving. They should redistribute that wealth, but I won't say any more than that from that point of view. And because they're the only points I can think about, I'm not going to say too much here. But I think personally, I know that in my family, like we're definitely not rich. Well, but the vast majority of my family do have different amounts to where different charities are laid out in their wills. And when I get to creating mine at some point, then I will definitely give to certain organisations. None like spring to mind, but I know that I used to like have a list, not a actual list, but a like mental list of the different organisations that I want to like give it to. Yeah, because my sort of take, and of course, I'm saying this as a 22-year-old that doesn't have children, doesn't have dependents, and doesn't have a partner. My opinion at this point in time is that as long as they're taken care of, then the rest of my money I would just like give to a charity and other good organisations, just so my death can have like extra benefits, well, for people in need. This is why I'm an organ donor, and it's why I'm gonna donate my body to medical science. I don't need my body; I'll be dead. So the second one is pattern of thinning may predict dementia 10 years before symptoms. A recent study from Claudia Zinkelman and US-based colleagues have identified a pattern of a grey matter thinning which appears to indicate significantly increased risk of developing Alzheimer's and related dementia 5 to 10 years before symptoms appear. Comparing MRI brain scans from a subset of their 1,500 participants with and without a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease or a related dementia, they identified that what they described as an ADRD signature pattern of cortical thinning in sections of the frontal, parietal, and temporal lobes. Then they went back to look at scans from other participants taken a decade earlier, and they found that people those brains that showed this a pattern of cortical thinning 10 years ago were more likely to have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease or a similar dimension since. So this, I think, is an absolutely brilliant finding, because this does potentially open us to a lot of the different possibilities. Because now we have this 5 to 10 year indicator, then I think that could be extremely important for diagnosis. Of course, there are practical implications, but let me go like my theory first, and then we'll talk about the practicalities of it. So if somehow, and of course this does sort of tap into the practicalities, if we were somehow able to give people who were more likely to develop dementia MRI scans, which are extremely expensive, to be honest, about once a decade or once every 5 years, then what we could do is we could look at the results, we could look at the cortical thinning, or to see if it's staying the same, and then if the results come back as unfortunately positive, then hopefully we could develop some sort of treatment, some sort of idea, some sort of intervention to help prolong the gap before symptoms start showing up. So that would be amazing if we could do it. So I definitely think that that's the next step. Okay, now that we've got this cortical thinning data, now we've got to create an intervention or something to help prolong that gap and keep it as long as possible, just so symptoms and therefore the onset of dementia stays as long as possible into the future. Of course, practically, I have no idea how you would pay for these MRI scans. I have no idea how you would target it. Of course, this would have to be a targeted approach. So you would have to identify other symptoms or different populations that could be a lot more at risk, which I talk about in my book, Dementia Psychology. So I definitely think this is a fascinating finding, and now we've got to get on with the next steps now, because the next step could be really, really important. And the last one is a quirky look at experienced love. If you're anything like us, last week's Valentine's Day Love Fest might have left you wondering what we really know about love. Research certainly shows that it supports our physical and mental health, and can even help us to live longer. However, there are still lots of different theories about everything from why we love to how many different types of love that there are. I think we've mentioned that on the podcast before. There are also plenty of unresolved questions about whether or not men and women experience love differently. For example, what there's much less of, writes Sandra Bakovich of Kendrick Marlow University in a new paper in Psychological Science, is actual empirical evidence of how we feel love day to day. To fill the gap, he recruited 4,000 US adults from an inventory of love to be filled out every day, every 30 minutes for 10 days. And if you want to have a look at the results, then definitely head on over to the BPS Research Digest website. So for starters, I think, of course, love's fascinating. I think it's a really interesting topic. Well, I was talking about this with my friend the other month, actually, like about love, how many times like we've both been in love, because my friend's capable of a lot more emotional expression than I am, and yeah, and like they're capable of different types of love. But to me, love's just romantic love, or to be honest, like love for family, like etc. But they're capable of like platonic love, whereas my equivalent is just I just like the person I as a friend, and that's about it. Or I care about them quite a lot, but I'd never say I love my friends. No, I really cannot imagine saying that. I just don't feel that strongly about them. So anyway, so we were talking about this like quite a bit, and I think the idea that how we experience love day to day is quite interesting, because I don't think it would change that much. But again, I'm actually doing this psychology, what were this myths about psychology book at the moment for release in 2025. And one of the myths that I'm going to be talking about at some point is how psychology isn't common sense. So I'm sort of aware of this at the moment, that even though common sense, I don't think there'd be any changes in love at all. I think we need to realise that, well, psychology is not common sense. Human behaviour isn't common sense. So this is why we've got to do the research. So I think I will definitely be checking that out after this podcast episode. But love, it's an interesting one. But I also think the methodology is quite interesting. So first of all, 4,000 participants. Absolutely amazing. I love that participant size. I love that sample size. I think it's absolutely brilliant. Brilliant though. And well done him for doing a large study, or being able to. I have no idea how you would recruit 4,000 participants so easily. You would have to have a lot of backing and a lot of resources. Of course, there's always the problem that it's only a research sample from one single country, and the US. I think if you're going to have a weird sample, I think that sums it up, because the US is very Western, educated, rich, industrialized, and democratic. So I definitely think that you're going to get biased results like from that, or right, or to be honest, like not so much biased, because I'm not really sure I like that word, but results which you cannot use to describe other cultures and different like societies. So I think it would have been best, and to be honest, you couldn't even To be honest, you can't even generalize these results across the entire Western world. So ideally, you would have had two, three, or maybe even four countries with a very large sample size. But again, I know that's a like difficult. I'm just saying, like in an ideal world, that's what you would do. And because time is actually like getting on, and I could talk about research methodology for a fair bit, I'm actually going to like wrap it up there. So I really hope that you enjoy the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So moving on to the personal update. So my week has been really weird, but there's definitely a lot to unpack, which is going to be useful to a lot of psychology students, especially master's students, undergraduate students, and to be honest, I'm pretty sure that the psychology professionals and the postgraduates can laugh at me for a little bit because there's some like funny stuff that happened in the middle of the week, and how I'm not bruised is amazing, to be honest. Okay, so at the start of the week, I had my psychology stats exams, which, as long term listeners of the podcast have known, we have had terrible stats teaching for the first term. Our new stats module is amazing. Absolutely got to love her, my lecturer. She is absolutely brilliant and she's so passionate and brilliant. But last term was horrific. We were all really worried, to be honest. Everyone in the School of Psychology at my university was quite scared and quite concerned about this. So it was not good. So we all did our exams. They were all online. Well, but the theory exam was multiple choice like questions. And to be honest, that does not make them easy. So you had your question and you had four possible answers. And the thing about university exams is the wording can be so slightly different that they mean different things. So you might put one option thinking that it's correct, or it's right, but because you selected the wrong option, it's marked wrong. So I've had that quite a few times in my psychology education. Like I know what I meant, and I know what the question's asking, but it's because the wording's slightly off in the exam choices, I've been marked wrong. Okay, and then in the computing exam, we like had our data. It was divided in like three different pieces, and then most of it was just auto marked. Same for the theory exam because it was just typing in numbers, and then the module convener had to check some of our contrast coding. Now, if you've done a psychology master's, you're probably very, very familiar with contrast coding. I'm not going to explain it because I know when it's used, I just cannot explain it to save my life. So, contrast coding, turns out I'm useless at it, but now I know how to do it because of the exam. So, I mean, and the reason why I'm talking about this is because we got our exam results on a Thursday. So 2 days after computing, 3 days after the theory. And so I'm telling you my results just to be honest, be open, and also just to show that you really don't have to get a distinction. N- And that's something else that I want to talk about in a minute because something quite odd happened this week, at least in our psychology group chat. So for my theory exam, I got 50%. I got exactly 20 questions right out of the 40. And if I got one more question wrong, I would have failed the exam. Thankfully, no one failed the theory exam. Then when it came to computing, I was really impressed and I was really happy. I got 68.75% correct, which is 18 points above the pass mark. So close to a distinction. So I was really happy because I was so nervous about that exam. To be honest, exams don't normally affect me, but I was really quite concerned about that, especially because they released our exam data early, and I was playing about with it in our studio. It wasn't working. I considered I couldn't do the basic stuff. 5 hours before the exam, I was a bit nervous. Thankfully, everything got sorted. So the reason why I'm telling you that is because I know in master's programs, especially in psychology, there's a lot of pressure, or people put a lot of pressure on themselves to get distinctions. And I think that if you want a distinction, definitely go for it. And I think if you want to do a PhD, or if you want to do something in academia, or even just psychology job market in general that requires you to have a distinction, then fine, fair enough. That quite lofty goal is really important. But to be honest, I was looking at the psychology group chat this week, and people put a lot of pressure on themselves to get a distinction. They think if they don't get a distinction, they're going to fail their masters. No, that isn't how it works. And I was talking to a PhD friend of mine like last year about this. It was something along the lines of once you get your masters, no one actually checks what mark you got. Like you have a masters, that's all they care about. So as long as you pass, and of course, always try your best. Always, always, always do your best in your exams, in your coursework, whenever. But it's not the end of the world if you don't get a distinction. Like, I'm just enjoying my masters. I'm learning. I'm trying as hard as I can in every single thing. But if I don't get a distinction, am I going to care? Not really. As long as I get a merit. Like, to be honest, I might be a bit of a hypocrite here, but I want to get a merit because that's a really good pass as far as I'm concerned. And to be honest, I should get a merit. So please, just be kind to yourself. And if you don't get a first in your undergrad, if you don't get a distinction, it's not the end of the world. You're still going to be able to do psychology. So that was the exam stuff. And then also what happened this week was, so last Saturday, I was talking to one of my friends about, oh yeah, like maybe we should share a house together, because that particular friend, another friend of mine, they're going to share a house together like next year, because they're both undergrads, and they're going to be sharing a house with someone they sort of know, but they aren't really sure if she's going to pull out or not. So I thought, right, okay, like I want to change my life. I want to do something very proactive that's really going to help me. So I thought, right, moving down to Canterbury, where I can be social, I can connect with the student community more, and all that rubbish. I thought, right, I think I'll volunteer. I think I'll talk to them, see if I can be a backup option. One of my friends loved it. One of my friends was a bit concerned, and then the next day they changed their mind completely, thankfully. Thankfully, and now they're like the most passionate person ever. Like they want me to live with them no matter what. So we were all talking there. That was last Sunday. So basically, the day before the last podcast episode came out, and then we said, right, on like Wednesday, the like other person who you don't know wants to meet you. There. So I met them. Okay, I'm not, yeah, like they're like nice enough. Being autistic, I'm not going to have that much of an emotional reaction like to them. And then what happened was we went to the viewing, because we basically went to some house viewings the very next day, and then we saw two like properties, and then we all got back in my car because I drove people because I'm nice, and then I've got a like funny thing to tell you in a minute though, and then like my friends have been talking, and then like they said, because we're so late in the game and we've seen a few houses now, this was the three of them, should we just get the first one? And again, like they were all talking about it. I was being very ambivalent. Now you guys have been listening to this podcast for years, well, some of you have, and to be honest, I'm very passionate about certain stuff. I could not care less about the particular house that we live in, because it was nice. it's not going to change my life if it's a bad house. Plus, it's just like for 1 year. I've slept in some really bad places over the years, um, especially in a scout. So I'm used to sleeping in bad situations. So I was very ambivalent. And then we all agreed that yes, so the first house is a good. So we put down a reservation, paperwork's getting sorted. And now, basically, in this next academic year, I'm going to be moving down to Canterbury and living with some friends, which, which to be honest, I know is so normal for so many people. But for me, it's really not because I've never had enough friends. I've never been in a place good enough to actually do that. So, to be honest, I'm still quite ambivalent to it. I don't think it's quite hit me what I'm doing, but I'm quite looking forward to it. Like, I'm feeling positive, and I've realised it has sort of triggered a bit of trauma. It has reminded me a lot of my past, and really odd thoughts happen when you've been through trauma and abuse. So that's quite interesting. And it was only this evening, and that sudden thoughts like it popped in. So that's definitely going to be an interesting and like few months. But I'm looking forward to it. To it though. The podcast did come up in the discussion though, because I was thinking, right, well, I have to prioritize the podcast. So I've decided that I'm going to commute home every week just to do the podcast because I cannot give you guys up. Like, I love this podcast way too much to even think about giving it up. And I was thinking about taking my audio booth down to Canterbury. No, that's just not going to work. Okay, and before I wrap up the week, let me tell you this a funny story. It's very, very short though, and it's a bit painful. So what happened was, so Thursday when we went for this house then, it was raining badly. Like, it was raining all day, the roads were flooded, etc. And when we went to do this second house, there was a bit of driving involved, and because I did not want to parallel park, I hate parallel parking. I've done it on my test. I passed. I don't want to do it again. Well, one of my many driving tests. So what happened was that I parked next to this quite steep grass bank though. So I got out my car fine. Didn't have a problem. We looked around the house. It was very nice actually. Like, I slightly would have preferred that house, but it was just too expensive and it was not worth the money. So then what happened was I was getting back in the car. So I opened my car door. I stepped on the very muddy bank. I slipped, I went straight down, and then my feet went under my car, sort of got pinned between the pavement, and my shins basically slammed into my car so hard that I had massive lumps by the time I got home. I mean, I don't know how to describe it, but I had massive lumps, and how they've not bruised is beyond me. Because I think that's just really, really weird though. But because I'm a bit of a trooper, apparently, I just got straight in my car, acted like nothing was wrong, until I only realised when I got home just how muddy and just in how much pain my legs actually were. So yes, so please be careful if your house is open and if you've parked next to a muddy bank. And finally though, and this is going to be really, really quick though, and because I left my laptop charger at a university social Wednesday night, I actually didn't have a laptop Thursday evening and for most of Friday, which is why I've not had time to do the podcast blog post like I normally would. So that was quite challenging because I had to do a lot of dictation, but I'm still really impressed that I was able to get quite a fair bit done. And as always, I always love to know your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi-whiteley. I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And you can always leave a comment on the Facebook post at Connor Whiteley, psychology author. And today's episode has been sponsored by CBT for Depression, a clinical psychology introduction to cognitive behavioural therapy for depression. Now, this book I absolutely love because the last CBT book, which was CBT for anxiety, that book sort of focused a bit more on anxieties and the different forms of anxiety disorders, and it still gave you a very good introduction to cognitive behavioural therapy. But this book takes cognitive behavioural therapy to a whole new level. It truly focuses on it. Like, depression takes up a tiny bit of the book just so you can really understand what depression is and how it works. But then the rest of it focuses on CBT a lot more. For example, how do CBT sessions work in a bit more detail? How does CBT work in terms of ending the therapy? And it also talks about the cognitive interventions that CBT therapists actually use and behavioural experiments. And then it also goes into so much more depth about safety behaviours and just different bits and pieces, which forms the basis of a CBT. I love this book. I really do love exploring like CBT because, yes, it's manualized. Yes, it doesn't work for everyone, but because it's evidence based and it's so manualized, I think it's really easy to actually just dig into, and I really like enjoy it, and that passion definitely comes through in this book. So that is CBT for Depression, a clinical psychology introduction to cognitive behavioural therapy for depression. Available from all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you requested. Or you can get the audiobook narrated by artificial intelligence at selected audiobook retailers like Kobo, Google Play, Barnes& Noble, and the selected library systems. So whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. And as always, a massive thank you to my wonderful patrons, with your support shows that you like the show and you want it to continue. And if you want to become a patron and get tons of great rewards, now you can at patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. So that's enough for the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about how are behavioural experiments used in cognitive behavioural therapy. This is a great episode. I really enjoy it. This is one of my favourite topics. So let's dive into it. What are behavioural experiments in cognitive behavioural therapy? This chapter covers another type of cognitive interventions that I absolutely love, because behavioural experiments are so cool, amazing, and just flat out brilliant. I love learning about them, and if you ever find a good video of these being done properly, or you will get to use them or see them in real life, you'll definitely realise they're amazing too. However, for the sake of clarity, a behavioural experiment is, open quote, planned experiential activities based on experimentation or observation, which are undertaken by clients in or between sessions, close the quote. Beverly et al. 2004. As well as that these are very powerful to combating safety behaviours, and their design is directly generated from cognitive formulations of presenting problems. In other words, behavioural experiments are done to counteract the client's presenting problems as seen in a hoc response formulation. For example, why use behavioural experiments? Personally, I would say, why wouldn't you use them? But as great as thought records are, because they allow clients to become more aware of their thinking and patterns of behaviour, and even can come up with their own alternatives to these thought and behaviours, the person can still not be fully convinced that the alternatives are true. As a result, behavioural experiments are: test a client's unhelpful existing beliefs, test out their new and more helpful beliefs, collect information to help develop the formulation further. They enable experiential learning, basically learning by doing. Allow clients to test theory A versus theory B. One of the ways, and something that is very common in a CBT, is that a client will argue forever that they know what they're saying and the alternatives are true at a logical and factor level, and they feel it in their heart and they know it in their head, but they still refuse to believe it. That's why behavioural experiments are very powerful ways to get them to see what happens when they drop their safety behaviours. Of course, I'm not saying that behavioural experiments are easy for both the therapist and the client, since the therapist needs to design behavioural experiments so carefully, because if one of these experiments goes wrong, then you have basically just confirmed outright a person's biased cognitive errors and beliefs. That is what you do not want. Additionally, these can be difficult for the client because your therapist is basically making you confront something you absolutely hate. However, I know this doesn't directly apply to depression. However, if you ever get a chance to see these experiments in practice as a student, then definitely watch them. Since the one that I watched was an anxious woman who believed she would have sweat pouring off her, she would be violently shaken like an earthquake, and she would be tomato red when she had to talk to a stranger. So the therapist filmed an interaction, and it turned out the woman was completely wrong. She wasn't bright tomato red, she wasn't shaking, you really couldn't tell she was shaking at all, and no visible sweat was coming off her. This made the woman very surprised and happy, and the therapist got the woman to do the experiment twice, once with the safety behaviour and one without. And you know what happened? The woman admitted that she looked so much more personable, likeable, and human when she did the experiment without her safety behaviours. It was very powerful and fascinating to watch and enjoy. On the whole, the purpose of behavioural experiments is to get new information so the client can test the validity of their existing beliefs and cognitions. This includes them testing the content of these beliefs and the cognitions and seeing the effect of their maladaptive processes, as well as behavioural experiments allow clients to create and test new, more adaptive beliefs and cognitions. Finally, if we apply this information to depression, the entire purpose of this book, then these experiments allow people to get new information to test the validity of alternative explanations of depression through behavioural activation and associated symptoms. I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode, and it was definitely a lot shorter than I thought, but I think this is a great topic. This was a very introduction-based chapter about behavioural experiments, but I still think that they're really useful. And to be honest, it did show you a lot of information, which I think is just brilliant. I think these are really fun, and these are really useful in real life. So I love them. I cannot recommend them enough. And if you know someone who enjoyed today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you want to people help spread the word about the podcast. And definitely check out CBT for Depression for more information. I love that book. I seriously do recommend it. Available in all the usual places, and you can get the AI generated audiobook at selected audiobook retailers. And if you want to become a patron of the show, now you can at patreon.com/psychologyworld podcast. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwhiteley.net. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time.